Hello and welcome to Krista So Crafty. My name is Krista and I really appreciate you being here today. Today I'm going to take you through how I made these 9x13 hot pad holders. This jelly roll is from Moda and it is called Just Another Walk in the Woods. Now, I'm not really sure if this is available because I have had it for quite a few years, but you can check, and if not, I'm sure you can find one that will work as well. I cut the strips the same width as the batting, and then that way, I have them approximately the same size. I put one down, I put the other one on top of it, right sides facing, and I sew down with a 1/4 inch stitch, and this is going to quilt it down onto the batting. I do this all the way down and just sew, I think there was 8 or 9 strips, but just make it as wide as your batting is. There's no real hard and fast rules on these, but this is what I'm going for with this. And I'm just going to continue on and place these strips down until I get the whole batting covered. Now that all the strips have been sewn onto the batting, I'm going to take it to the cutting table and I'm going to trim it up. I will trim it now to the 9x13, and I'm just following the edge of the batting for my lines. What I like to do is start on one edge and line it up on my ruler on the bottom and one side and trim it all up, make it nice and neat. Then I'm going to flip it over and line it up against the edge of the mat so that I can make sure I'm getting it nice and straight. So I will line it all up and I will trim it to be the 9 inches in width, and then I will deal with the 13 inches wide. You want to make sure that your material that you cut to begin with is wide enough that you can make these cuts. So, and then these pieces here, they're just trash. I'll throw those in the garbage. So now here I'm going to flip it around, and I want to cut this so that the left and the right pieces are approximately the same width. How I'm going to achieve that is I'm just going to split the difference between the green and the pink, so the left and the right, and I'm going to make them as equal as I can in width. I made sure that I lined up the bottom of the mat on one of the lines on the cutting mat so that I made sure everything was going to be nice and straight. Okay, so now we have this all cut out, we can move on and cut out the backing for the hot pad holder. So this is just a scrap piece basically that I had. It's a little pink piece with some floral. It's quite pretty, and it's just cotton material. So that's what I'm going to use for the backing, and I'm going to cut it out to the 9x13. I'm going to take the backing and lay it on the back side of our hot pad holder against the batting, so you want the wrong sides touching. Our next step is to make our binding. So I have a bunch of these leftover strips. They're like partial cuts. So I'm going to use those, and I'm just going to sew them together and make one long strip. And this is what I'm going to use for my binding. So if you're cutting out material, you want to cut out 2.5 inch strips. That's what I like to use. Some people use a 3-inch strip, but I like to use a 2.5 inch strip. And then just sew them. You can either sew them on an angle like I'm sewing them here, or you can just sew them end to end. Either way, you just want to get your binding ready so that we can start ironing and getting it sewn on. When you do your binding this way, you do have these little ends to clip off. I leave about a 1/4 inch and cut the pieces apart. Now I'm going to do that all the way down the strip, and then I'm going to take it over to the ironing board. Press all of these seams open. This will help them to lay down flatter when we go to put the binding onto our project. So just take your iron, give them a good press, and make sure they're laying down nice and neat. Now we can go ahead and start folding our binding in half and giving a good press. When I'm putting binding onto a project, whether it be something small like a mug rug or a hot pad holder or as big as a quilt, I always like to start on the back side of the project. I leave a 3 or 4 inch strip and start sewing down from there. I do a 1/4 inch stitch, and I always do a back stitch. I'm going to go all the way to the corner, and we are going to miter our corner. Now, I really enjoyed mitering the corners. It makes them look so nice and neat and professional. They're not near as scary as you think they are. So get to your corner, and then I stop about a 1/4 inch from the edge, and then I just kind of sew off the material. Then you bring up your binding, line it up along the right side. Make sure that the fold, when you fold it back over, lines up with the top edge, and then I just do a little back stitch and start sewing down the other side. Once you get the last mitered corner done, you're only going to sew maybe 1/2 inch to 1 inch, and you're going to backstitch and stop. You want to make sure to leave again that 3 or 4 inches so that we can sew our binding together. Take your 2 pieces of binding and kind of find the center between the 2 of them. And what I like to do is line them up, and then I fold them over and I finger press them down so that it creates a crease. And then this is where I'm going to use as a basis to sew them together. And by doing this, I never have issues with my binding. Now you can finger press this, you can put some pins in there, whichever way works best for you. I am going to cut off a little bit of this extra binding because it's kind of in the way, but other than that, I'm just going to line these up, and I like putting pins in where the fold is because it's such a tight little area in there, and it just helps to keep that line, everything lined up perfectly. I put the pins right on the fold line, and then I can take the 2 pieces and put them together and match up those pins, and then put a pin going the opposite way, and then I know then that those are going to be exactly where I need them to be. So then I will go and sew right on that fold line. Once you get this all pinned together, what I like to do is take it over to the sewing machine and just stitch down that line. And I'd like to do a back stitch at the beginning and the end. This just helps to ensure that it's not going to come apart. And now once this is done, this is the beauty. You can open it up, lay it down, and it will lay down beautifully. You want to make sure it's going to fit before you trim off this extra stuff. Trim it off with a 1/4 inch seam, and then we're just going to finger press that open. Now go ahead and just stitch the rest of that seam down, and we can now move on to the next, which is to flip it over. I do like to take it over to the ironing board and press those binding pieces open, and it just helps to wrap them around easier on the other side. Flip your binding over to the other side and kind of poke those corners down into the binding, and we're going to sew this down very close to the edge of the binding. Now, as you get to the corner, we're going to do a mitered corner again. So I like to fold up the bottom piece up into the project and then put my fingernail in there and kind of poke it underneath the right-hand side piece, and then stitch down. And I just go just barely over the mitered part, and then I start sewing down the other side. And we're just going to continue this all the way around. And again, this is now the final step on our project. To me, this is just what makes this project look so nice and so professional. Meet up your stitching with where you started, trim your threads, and you're all done. So here is our finished project. I love how it turned out. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing to my channel, and click on the bell to receive notifications every time I upload a new video. Happy crafting!